Hello, everyone. We're back for our next panel, and leading us for this session will be Katti Gray, our journalism coordinator for the webinar. Katti, over to you.
Hi, welcome. Thanks, everyone. So the more extended bios, y'all have them. I want to welcome James Hamm, who is, if I'm not mistaken, James, you're an ASU law grad. Isn't that your alma mater? You're sort of,
yes.
Right. He is, as the bio says, founder and director of the nonprofit prisoner advocacy organization, Middle Ground Prison Reform. We also have with us Emily Kleeman, who is executive director of the Reentry initiative, which is outside of Denver. Place it for me, correct?
Correct. We work in Denver Women's Correctional Facility, and we also work in Boulder County in Longmont.
Wonderful. And Khalil, I'm not going to butcher your last name. Would you pronounce it correctly for me?
Khalil Rushdan.
Rushdan. I've been calling it something else. But and Khalil is for the ACLU in Arizona, the Smart Justice Community Partnership coordinator. Both he and Mr. Hamm bring to us the experience of having been incarcerated and navigating that world. So if we might just dive in, James Hamm, I'm going to let you go first. Then we'll go to Ms. Kleeman and to Mr. Rushdan. Did I get it? Okay, and we'll go from there.
All right. My name is James Hamm. I'm the legislative director for Middle Ground Prison Reform, which is an organization that's been operating in Arizona since 1983. And just to correct one little thing, it was actually founded by my wife, Donna Leone Hamm, in 1983. I was still in prison. I spent 18 years in prison. I pled guilty to a drug-related homicide in 1974. I was given a 25-year to life sentence. And I didn't appeal or anything like that because I was guilty. In fact, I was having severe mental difficulties, which were a large part of the crime itself. And so I felt that it was important for me to plead guilty because I felt that was the only way to sort of put some brakes on the continuing mental difficulties that I had. And I did. I went to prison, and prison at that time in Arizona was a very, very violent place. For a significant period of time, we all referred to it as the Murder a Month Club, because it was extremely violent. While I was in prison, I met some amazing people. I'm not talking about the staff, although there were some amazing people on the staff. I met some inmates who were quite amazing and who helped me. I also met the person who later became my wife, and I met her while I was in prison. She encouraged me to apply for commutation of sentence, but I was not comfortable doing that because I had not resolved my own difficulties about my participation in my own crime. And 6 years later, I did apply for commutation. Ultimately, I was granted a commutation by the governor, but then the governor, under pressure, removed the commutation, and I had to litigate in order to have it restored. It was judicially restored. I then I went to the parole board. I was paroled. I spent 9 years on parole. I was paroled in 1992 and continued to work with Middle Ground Prison Reform on a volunteer basis. Middle Ground is an all-volunteer organization. In 2001, I was granted an absolute discharge by the board and have continued. I had participated already. As soon as I was out, I applied for law school. I was granted admission to the law school. I graduated in 1997. I applied for admission to the bar. I was not allowed to join the bar. And so I work with attorneys and with organizations to assist people in terms of really what we're talking about today, which is navigating reentry, as well as dealing with the legal system. My wife started Middle Ground in 1983, and she has been the primary component for working with prisoners. All I can say is that we receive hundreds of letters every month. We receive dozens of emails every day. Many of them deal with prison issues, but many of them deal with post-prison issues. We have assisted a lot of people in terms of navigating the probation system, the parole system, and even people who have been paroled but are out on the streets and homeless. These people have a lot of difficulty because stress in this environment is different for a person who has just recently come from prison, because in prison, stress really means you go into an ultra defensive mode and it becomes really a source of anger and frustration. Out here in the community, stress should be something different. It should be a motivation to change or to find a solution to problems. And what we have found is that there are a lot of people who don't really make that particular transition very well. There are some key issues. I would like to point out at least one of the things. I earned a degree in sociology, a bachelor's degree in sociology while I was in prison, in a program where guards and prisoners went to school at the same time in the same room. I earned that from Northern Arizona University on an off-campus degree program. And I mention that because of all the things that I learned in the sociology degree program, one jumped off the page at me, and it has meant more to me than anything else. And that is, I read in a book that there was an evaluation of programs that were being designed to help people solve their problems. And of course, there are different modalities that are appropriate for different kinds of problems. And what this sentence said was that when there was a perceived commitment on the part of the participants, that the person who was delivering the program was fully committed to helping them, all of a sudden the success rate rocketed. In other words, they were successful even when the modality was wrong. It wasn't supposed to work for their problem, but it did, simply because of that connection between them, the participants, perceiving that there was a sincere commitment on the part of the deliverer to help them. It's one of those, I'm here to help you kinds of things when it is delivered sincerely. They're not there to pick up a paycheck. They're not there to try a new idea. They're not there because they think they've got the solution to the world. They're there to help someone in their own life. And it has made such a marvelous difference. Once I really understood that, I saw what was going on in the prison system with programs very differently. And after my release, I see what is going on out here in the community very differently. We have helped a lot of people who have had very serious difficulties with either the parole officer or the probation officer, the system itself, or even with the legal system. And they're not sure how to navigate that system. And I don't necessarily mean that there are problems with driver's licenses and communication and jobs and residence. Those things are serious, and they obviously affect everyone who gets out. I'm talking more about internally. And what has happened is that with meeting with these people is that we have seen that they don't really manage well in terms of this stress and their decision making. Obviously, these people are responsible for their own lives. They're responsible for trying to reintegrate into the community with whatever is available, and sometimes nothing is available. But what they don't have is they don't have a pattern for dealing with this stress and the problems that are going on. And what we have found is that when they are interacting with someone who is able to criticize them in a way that they do not take it personally. I saw a marvelous program one time when after I was out and I went back to prison to a program that was for people who had gone out of prison on parole and who had gone to their parole officer and said, I am on the verge of failing. I can feel myself going back to drugs. I can feel myself going back to drinking. I can feel myself going back to crime or to just bad behavior, reconnecting with people who are not good for them, and I need help. And what the Arizona Department of Corrections set up a program where they could refer these people to a special temporary program. And it has worked out really well. I attended that program as an observer for a while. And what I saw was that these people could criticize each other in a way that they all took in a positive way. They could even say things like, you were an idiot for doing that. You were an idiot for going to a job interview dressed like that. Do you not realize what's going on? But the person did not take it as a true criticism because they were used to that kind of interaction from other people in prison. They didn't take it personally. And as a result, there was a change in what they did, how they saw their own decision-making process. And I think that is a large part of what is going on in terms of transitioning into the community. I have a lot of personal experience as well because I was in prison for 18 years. It was a very long period of time. And obviously the transition was difficult, but I don't really want to go into that unless there are questions about that. I would like to say that there are there are many new programs that indicate that they are chasing the money with regard to reentry. I'm not necessarily convinced that those programs are really right for everyone, but I'm not here to criticize those programs either. I see this as a discussion. I believe this is going to be more of a discussion about what we could do and what we should do rather than a criticism of what we are doing. I think I will close with that, and we can go on from there.
Perfect. Thank you so much, James. And so now I dispense with the honorifics. Emily, you're on. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, James, for that wonderful introduction and background in your history, and thank you for having me today. I began my journey in human service field in 2001 when I attended Colorado State University for a bachelor's degree in human development and family studies. In 2005, I moved home to Baltimore, Maryland, where I spent 5 years post-undergrad working and developing my skills in the human service field. In 2007, I was accepted into the graduate school of the University of Maryland School of Social Work. And upon graduation from my master's program, I embarked on the road to obtaining my license in clinical social work and completed that in 2014. In June 2015, I relocated to Denver, Colorado to continue my career in social work in various nonprofit agencies, working in alternative treatment courts, specifically addressing trauma and its effects on the family and individual. In early 2018, I was offered a chance to join the Reentry Initiative Board of Directors to better understand the issues women were facing during reentry from incarceration. Within a few short months, I accepted the position of the Executive Director of TRI, and with the intent to develop a program that would effectively meet the needs of our community while also reducing recidivism locally and statewide. The Reentry Initiative was founded in 2016 by our wonderful visionary leader, Deborah Simmons. She had a vision of a world where formerly incarcerated adults thrive in a community without reoffending. TRI's mission is to provide comprehensive services inside and outside prison walls that empower adults to achieve fulfilling and crime-free lives in their communities. Since the start, we've grown and expanded our services to provide wraparound comprehensive support, therapeutic services to our members in one spot. We're reducing barriers and we're increasing dignity and respect in the reentry process. Over the years, Deborah and our team researched and found the majority of incarcerated women came from unstable backgrounds with significant numbers of adverse childhood experiences, histories of violent relationships, chronic poverty and homelessness, and insufficient access to medical and behavioral health care. The vast majority are reporting at least one mental health issue in addition to addiction and trauma. TRI has been providing our pioneer year-long voluntary reentry program called Triumph inside Denver Women's Correctional Facility since 2016. The program includes an 8-month evidence-based cognitive behavioral treatment curriculum, individual trauma-informed mental health and substance abuse counseling, and a collaborative transition planning program with care managers for medium to high-risk women. Our model of care is unique because we offer comprehensive treatment 3 years prior to release in conjunction with continuum of care and support into their communities post-release. Our care managers are highly trained to evaluate and work individually with women to develop comprehensive release plans, which will help the member reach self-sufficiency. Upon release, TRI's post-release program provides the first threes, which are coordinated care for the first 3 hours, the first 3 days, 3 weeks, 3 months, and 3 years post-release. We continue to provide outpatient mental health and substance abuse therapy, and we do that through our wellness center, and we have weekly ongoing care management aimed to assist them with plans of self-sufficiency, community connection, and access to their supports. Our Welcome Back Center that's located in Boulder County and serving Longmont and surrounding areas is fully funded by our Latino Coalition of Community Leadership. We offer an array of services post-release that includes supports, incentive-based services, and contracted services, all aimed for self-sufficiency. Our supports include financial assistance programs for employment, education, housing, medical, and non-medical needs. We provide transportation assistance, basic needs such as clothing and hygiene, and assistance obtaining needed documents for employment, such as ID, birth certificate, and social security cards. Our financial incentives are used to recognize our members' achievements throughout the completion of the program, and those activities include life skill groups, obtaining and retaining employment, and working on educational certifications. The final cornerstone of our programming we offer is our newly launched Wellness Center. TRI's Therapeutic Service Program, which is funded through the Department of Corrections and Medicaid, is really helpful in really bringing together the reentry process. Evidence has suggested that individuals who recidivate or stumble along the reentry journey tend to be those who are not provided adequate therapeutic care prior to and upon reentry. And this is what's hindering their ability to gain self-sufficiency in housing, work, and education. With DOC's inclusion of community-based organizations as alternative treatment providers, TRI has redefined what it means to serve an individual on parole in Boulder County. We now provide the intended in-house wraparound services, which help the members stay engaged and reduce their need to bounce from one organization to another for care management and support. We are addressing their members' underlying mental health, substance abuse, and trauma immediately upon release, which are also helping them better stabilize in their community over time. As we enter our 5th year of operation, I can confidently say that at TRI, we are implementing a model of care that has proven to work and addresses the needs of the individuals on a personal basis. We are becoming a leader and experts in treatment planning for gender-specific services and seeing positive results. I want to leave you with a short story of one of our Triumph pre-release women. Amy spent her childhood bouncing around foster homes and was incarcerated for the very first time by age 19 and served 8 years. When we first heard her story, we realized she needed wraparound support, life skills training, and intensive mental health services. We worked with her for 2 years before she released, and upon release, she completed her GED, obtained and retained her employment for the last 2 years, and has been in the same stable housing the duration of her time. She is reunited with her child and is making plans to take full parental custody. Today, she is growing into a self-directed young woman. And as recent as last Wednesday, I received a phone call where she was so elated to tell me that she was released from parole supervision 2.5 years early. She is now a free woman. And this is the definition of TRI's vision and mission. And she stated to her team, and I quote, "I am no longer surviving, but thriving." So thank you so much.
Thank you, Emily. There's a lot to dig into. Based on my reporting, there are not a lot of programs like yours around the country. So we can dig into that later. Khalil, you're on. Thank you.
Thank you for having me today. My name is Khalil Rushdan. I am a full-time employee of the ACLU of Arizona as their community partnership coordinator. I'm also a part-time case manager with Sage Counseling. I sit on a variety of different boards across the state and the valley. However, the biggest hat that I wear is someone directly impacted by incarceration. I was a youth who ran away at 13. I had a troubled, life as a teen and got involved with the wrong things. I take responsibility for getting involved in the wrong things, breaking the law, and then that led me to the crime I went to prison for, which was a drug transaction that went wrong. Even though I wasn't there when the transaction happened, didn't participate in the murder that took place or the robbery. However, I was put in a position where I was forced to either comply and insist and become an informant to help the state capture the individuals or go to prison for it. And, I don't care how much people say, they're prepared to lay down and do time and all of that. At this point in time, I was thinking, well, why am I going to go to prison for what somebody else did? Well, it was either that or go to prison for what somebody else did. The gist of it is, after letting them know that my role in what happened that day and me not having anything to do with the murder or didn't know it was going to happen, turned over my weapons, completed a ballistics test on my weapon, fingerprints, polygraph, in order to clear my name. Later, I ended up being charged, tried, and convicted for the crime that I had cleared my name on, because I refused to testify against an individual at trial. So I ended up serving 15 and a half years of a life sentence prior to my case being overturned due to prosecutorial misconduct and vindictiveness. And, it really changed my life, because my time down, I had to get to know myself. And this is one of the bigger problems with what we call reentry or transition. From 13 to 38, I was off the grid. I was in the community. I didn't have a job. I never needed to use my Social Security or anything like that. I was involved in selling drugs at the time. And, from 13 to 22 is when I was in the streets, went to prison at 22. From 22 to 38, I'm in prison. So like I said, from 13 to 38, I'm off the grid. So when we talk about reentry, I was never actually entered into society. And I think some of the game plans or the transitional plans that are in place really don't factor in where an individual was prior to incarceration. Some of those transitional plans are put together based on the nature of an individual's crime and the amount of time they've done in prison. However, like I said, most of the individuals have never established themselves in society to begin with. So in my instance, I had to deal with a lot of traumas associated with confinement. And the work I'm doing now, I get people to understand the punishment piece of this is your sentence was in no way meant to be rehabilitative. It was meant to punish. And it states that crime and punishment. So we need to accept those words for what it is. And if we're looking to change those words, let's be intentional about the actions of changing them. There were several programs inside of the prisons, but over the years while I was there, they have been gutted. You used to have licensed counselors on the yard. Licensed counselors were taken away. Some of those programs are more of leisure time. They're not vocational. And then another piece about programming, there's this narrative that these are training programs for individuals who we want to teach them life skills and skills on when they're released. It all boils down to labor. And we have to accept that fact for what it is. So one of the things associated with my traumas, upon release, 8 months later, my mom passed away. The one person that was in my corner, the one person that was rooting for me, the only person that was really sending me a letter every month. So now, on top of me having to deal with my own transition and those traumas associated with confinement, now I have to deal with the death of my mother. So when we talk about traumas and how they compound or wrap around like an onion, there's not a lot of people who understand those traumas. And when an individual gets out and they may struggle with addressing those traumas or an adjustment to society, they're judged for that. So some of them are violated. Some of them are sent back on technical violations or whatever. I mean, there's a culture shift now, but prior to this culture shift, you had people going back to prisons just for struggling with that adjustment. Okay, so some of those traumas during identifying the traumas of incarceration or confinement, when individuals come out, you know, where you were making limited choices inside of a prison, now you're having to deal with multiple choices. So your 30-minute trip to the store might turn into 2 hours. You may end up taking showers with your shower shoes on, those type of things. Some people were locking themselves down at 8 o'clock, because they until they made that adjustment, they're like, well, I'm gonna lock myself down. The overall goals of change people have to understand the culture associated with crime and punishment. And it's that narrative of getting tough on crime. So then that narrative or that mentality then gets pushed on the individuals who we say we want to rehabilitate. We want to help them come out and be better people. And I just think that's wrong. So the language we use, the intentions behind that language, and then it takes a village. I've always said it takes a village to raise a child. It takes that same village to help an individual upon release. And there's too much tension out here between organizations. When everybody says they have the same good intentions to help or represent those who are most marginalized on these prison yards, a lot of people don't come together. It's about money. And I agree with that. It's about money. It's about keeping their organizational lights on. So that interest of keeping their organizational lights on, it doesn't necessarily mean a win for that organization is a win for those who are directly impacted. And that's where we have to stop accepting the false narrative and stand on the truths. We have a lot of policies here in Arizona that are outdated. I have several individuals who have gotten out of prison who done everything. They fulfilled their obligations. They've done everything the state has asked them to do. However, they still can't go and get housing. So I want to say that, and that's part of the problem, just accepting those facts.
Khalil, thank you so much. That's actually a perfect segue and a perfect contrast, because I want to come back to you, Emily, and sort of establish a baseline. Again, based on my reporting, there are not a lot of programs like yours. So I'm curious, one, in how much of the lead your organization took in persuading, if you will, the Department of Corrections to help you set up this construct. Who were sort of the personnel in that? Were they yours? Were they theirs? How does it work? And using that 19-year-old, we don't need her name, but what are those wraparound services specifically? What things is she provided before leaving prison and coming out of prison?
Correct. Thank you. I want to just reiterate exactly what you just said, Khalil, that it's not just about, it has become competing resources on the outside for nonprofits. So we really take a stand now that we want to break down the silo walls and share resources. So the Reentry Initiative, what we did inside, it took about 1.5 years to really establish our program. It is not a program that they can earn timed credit. They do not get anything as far as credit towards their time spent inside by doing our program. So we're still fighting for that. However, it took 1.5 years changing the culture inside, and that meant working with the case managers and first listening to them and trying to find out what they needed, because we knew they were very siloed and cut off from the outside.
Wait, hold on, they were your case managers or inside the prison?
DOCs, Department of Correction case managers. They are, they are historically are supposed to be helping their women make transition plans. And as we've just heard, those plans are not robust. They're not individualized. They don't take into account the recidivism from years past or the family that they dropped out of the county. So what we do for our woman, for example, she came from foster care. She went from one home to another. When I met her, she couldn't bathe. She didn't know how to shower. She didn't know how to manage her mental health and trauma. She had been sexually abused, emotionally, physically abused her whole life. The system had failed her over and over again, leading up to her crime. And then when she went in, she was only 19 years old. So she never, ever had a chance to even start a life. So when I met her inside, I spent those 2 years every 5 days a week going in with my care management team, working with her DOC case manager in giving her proper mental health treatment for trauma, working through different supports we could provide her outside because she had none. And then at the same time, really creating this program and proving day to day how much of a need it was. After class 1 and 2 went through and we had a third class, it was unbelievable to see the amount of women that were talking to each other just to get into our courses. It wasn't fully accepted by DOC inside really right until pandemic hit. And right the month before, in February 2020, I was just handed keys to my own office and a mailbox so I could receive kites and full access in and out without having to call every day to make an appointment to come in, which was extremely time consuming for my staff. So then pandemic hit, and once again, because there's no infrastructure as far as remote telehealth, we have been cut off from our pre-release program. Granted, our women, because we've been working with them in those supports, again, every day meeting them with them for an hour to 3 hours, just talking about their life, trying to find the right connections that would make sense for them, has really led them to advocate for themselves more. And they actually put us on their phone call list. And so they call me on their own now. They've bypassed the case manager just to connect with me. And I'm still doing all the transition planning from the outside with weekly or monthly updates to them on a phone call. And then day of release, I'm there 7 a.m. at the front door with everything ready to take them out into their community.
And so the care management plan is what? Discharge planning for medical, mental health, behavioral health care, etc.
Employment, housing, and then we provide all the financial supports because they don't have money to do that.
So before I move, because there are a ton of questions, and I knew there would be, who's on your care management team? Their profile, their sort of pedigree, what do they do?
We have I try to hire master level clinicians. So anyone with a social work degree or counseling in cognitive behavioral or somatic, more right-brained or left-brain therapies. We're trying to bring a blend of professionals who all have extensive background in trauma work or lived experience, which we all share. We all have family members and or significant others that have been incarcerated and have helped them on their journeys on the outside, as well as in the inside while they were incarcerated. So we all really, we never stop learning. We're always training and we're always continuing to look beneath the behaviors to understand the why, which is what speaks to trauma and just adverse childhood experiences.
So James and Khalil, I'd like for both of you to weigh in. One, to contrast your own experience preparing to leave prison, what you got or didn't get when you got out, and in your work with people who are leaving now, what supports, what infrastructure is there? We have a story, and Michael, I'd appreciate it if you put it in the chat, that posted on our own website, the Crime Report this morning, about how the lack of federal funding for this work is impairing the work. So if y'all would weigh in, please. James, if you'd go first, and then Khalil, that'd be great.
In terms of getting ready for release, I knew when I was getting out because I had been granted release by the parole board. And in preparing for that, quite frankly, there was no program in the Department of Corrections at that time that had it. The Department of Corrections in Arizona now has a program that sort of brings a whole host of people together in order to facilitate the transition, at least for people. It's sort of a one-stop shop for all sorts of things like driver's licenses and check writing and setting up a bank account and understanding how to use the transportation system. At that time, they didn't have anything like that. And so what happened was my wife simply got me a subscription to the Arizona Republic, and I read the newspaper every day for months, simply not because I was particularly interested in it, but because it sort of shifted my focus from what's going on in the prison to what's going on outside of prison. And then in addition to that, I had a home to go to and I had money. So I wasn't in the same situation as most of the people that I dealt with who were leaving and who had come back because they had failed. And so, and then I had a lot of difficulty with, just navigating, getting a driver's license, things like that. I wasn't really interested in pushing that sort of, I was moving slowly and I felt that I needed to move slowly. But what happened over time was that we continued to get people who were having difficulties because they had been released and they were coming to middle ground because they didn't really know where else to go. And so we began meeting with these people and we began trying to help them. Some of them were homeless. Some of them were people who were having problems with their probation officer. They weren't able to go to churches because they had a sex offense and they were saying you can't go because there are children in the church. I mean, it's just a whole host of things. And what we found was that what they most appreciated was the opportunity to come in where someone was not judging them, who wanted to help them and who would answer their questions and even criticize them and make suggestions about what they could do. We had, in some cases, we actually had people live with us for a short period of time. In some cases, we facilitated going to their probation officer or parole officer with them. In some cases, we facilitated a little bit of financial assistance. We are an all volunteer, all donation organization. Khalil mentioned about the difficulties about different organizations competing for funds. We saw that early on and didn't want to have anything to do with it. And so we just decided it was either going to be donations or nothing. So it was in-kind contributions from us based on the work that we did. And it gave us the freedom to criticize the Department of Corrections in constructive and non-constructive ways. In many ways, for the first few years, we were a watchdog agency rather than a cooperative agency. And they needed that. They needed to be told what they were doing wrong. But basically what we have done is an informal person-to-person kind of assistance when people come to us with emergencies. And we are not a social service agency, although my wife is very good at referring people to social service agencies, particularly those that we have some respect for and we feel that they are treating people with dignity. But we really are, I'm the legislative director for Middle Ground. We're interested in changing laws. We're interested in fighting against negative laws. And so to a certain extent, we are just practical experience people with regard to the transition from our own experience and from dealing with many other people.
Sure, we want to get to there's a question about reform, but before that, Khalil, the folks you are working with, particularly now who have come out amid COVID, what's there for them? What supports are there? Who's succeeding? Who isn't? What are the obstacles in this moment? What do journalists need to be looking at in trying to tell the reentry story?
So journalists, reentry starts, like I said, when the individual walks through that gate, they should be on a pathway toward rehabilitation. So, the biggest problem with the reentry part into the community is a mind state. If there's a punitive culture in your prison system, then it's going to be a punitive transition. And, it's more like being in an abusive relationship with corrections, and then you're forced into the community in community corrections. And even though you may receive a parole officer or community corrections officer that wants to help you, there's no trust established there based on the experience while you were incarcerated. So when I was there, real quick, your transitional social workers are supposed to be CO3s who's supposed to help you get everything together. And
what does that mean, CO3? What does that mean?
It's a correctional officer 3, which is you have a entry-level correctional officer and then you just move up the rank. Your correctional officer 3s are usually plainclothes officers who are supposed to be there to deal with your day-to-day, whether it's establishing your transition plan or creating a transition plan, your programming, your reclassification, things like that. They're more on the administrative side of prepping you for release, or just your day-to-day operations in there as far as programming. The problem with that is security comes first. So they're trained in security. Half the time they get pulled to do security. you have one correctional officer that may have a caseload of 180 individuals. And half the time they're not able to see these guys. So even though there's programs in place, like James was saying, they're second chance centers, which is only on 3 of the units out of the whole Department of Corrections within the state. So it's more of a program that's so small, it's only touching a fraction of the individuals that are being released each year. So we still have guys going through that program who are not coming out with their IDs, even though the money was taken off of their books, who were not signed up for state healthcare insurance. So when they're released, we have to do another assessment, try to get them vested, or try to get these materials or their vital documents to them, but then also get them vested in programming, employment. If they're trying to reestablish relationships with their family, we're trying to get them vested as quick as possible, because it's just harder to overcome a lot of these stress factors and high anxiety. And it's easier to just walk away and say, hey, I'm cool, I can go back to what I was doing. I say that because going back to the word transition, I see a lot of programs in state prison systems transferring people from place to place, not transitioning them. And there's a difference between the two. And we're seeing people transferred from prison to society with so many barriers that they still have to overcome. It's harder for them to move forward. Sure.
I'm going to go to the fellows' questions. This one is from Tim, and I think we've been butchering your name, Igo, with Arizona Attorney Magazine. He asks, has the ban the box movement, not requiring people to check off that they've been incarcerated, if it's helped former incarserees obtain housing, education, and employment, or have its results fallen short of that promise? And of course, ban the box is different wherever by jurisdiction. But if y'all would address that, please.
Well, I would like to point out that there is a difference between a legislative change that says that an employer cannot ask you a question and the reality, because in the reality, all you have to do is Google a person's name and you have a ton of information about that person. And so it is not as though the employer, the potential employer, is ignorant. It just means that the person can't formally ask you that question. When we deal with people, this is a very common question that we get about people who say, hey, can you help me? What should I do here? Before the ban the box legislation came in. And what we encourage them to do is to be upfront with their potential employer and to tell them, I'm recently released, but on the other hand, I'm a very committed person. I need a job and I am committed. If you need me, I need you, and you will find me to be an extremely valuable employee. And what we have found is that people want to give other people a chance. I mean, obviously, there are a lot of large organizations that don't want to take the risk because their lawyers tell them not to. But most people aren't going to work for a super giant organization anyway. And so we have found that kind of advice, now the person can take the advice or not take the advice, but we have found that is the best thing to tell them. And it has worked out very well for the people who do take that advice.
Khalil, I know you're chomping at the bit. Go.
Yeah, I wanna jump in too on this, because I've been addressing this for years. Ban the box legislation in Arizona does nothing. The metrics, the intent of this policy, I want to say, it measures whether an individual is getting an interview, not whether they're hired. And I say that because that's sad. Whoever was in that room and came up with it, their intentions was not to implement a solution. And we're starting to see, when we talk about implementing solutions, we don't see solutions at the core. We can resolve this issue overnight if we wanted to. The other part about that is ban the box as far as your state, city, your county government. They're implementing that policy, and it's good that they're implementing that policy and they're abiding by it. But most of the jobs have been created in the private sector, where there are no regulations. They don't want to regulate. I get it, but how do you get around that? how do you make Band the Box the force that it was meant to do by empowering people who have backgrounds? You incentivize it. And I've seen this happen in other states. They've incentivized hiring on where there's tax credits given to those businesses and so on. But it all boils down to the punitive culture. If you have a punitive culture in this state, it's going to play out in employment, housing, and everything else.
Emily?
Right. The only thing I would add to this is that we need to eradicate all boxes, because why are we even having boxes to get in the door before you get to know somebody? Again, it's all about narrative and networking. My members, we spend 90% of our time behind doors trying to network with employers to just give us a chance to talk to us about our amazing members. And they're better employees than some of the ones they currently have. But I shouldn't have to be spending my time bargaining and negotiating. And I also shouldn't be seeing Band-Aid solutions such as a box going away from an application, because again, they get in the door, go to the interview, and if you have someone across the table with you with deep-seated racial biases, you're stuck. And that, so again, we talk about it and we work with them one-on-one. How do you address these things? But it's not enough.
Khalil, you mentioned metrics. Do you know of any data anywhere in the country that has measured the results of Ban the Box initiatives?
Offhand, I was actually looking at California, and I got to go back and I'll get that for you, but each state does it differently. And over the years, I've been trying to advocate for a more robust solution or law here, because everybody was basically discussing Ban the Box. That was the next best thing to sliced bread, was this Ban the Box initiative. And I say this because the bigger problem I had with it was that a lot of individuals were walking out of prison and they were happy and they were excited about this Ban the Box initiative, not understanding that, you know, when you go, as everybody on this call said, when you go for that interview, they're excited. Hey, I got this interview. That some of them actually get hired. 2 weeks later, they get a call and say, hey, sorry, you didn't pass the background. That is the most discouraging feeling that a person probably can get, you know, or have. So, you know, measuring that and how it plays out, I've just looked at a few studies from California, some from New York, and just watched or tried to learn how their Ban the Box is more robust than Arizona. And then hopefully we can get a study group. You know, I'd love to everybody to come together. If we're talking about implementing solutions, let's really, you know, study what they're doing across this country and then look on how we can safely implement it here. Because remember, the narrative is always public safety. I don't want to hire this individual because they might jeopardize public safety while they're my employee or while they're living next to me.
This question is from Colleen Slevin from the Associated Press. She asked, what kinds of prison programs do you think are most helpful to prisons later when they're released, and how common are they? Are there fewer that are than in the past? And y'all alluded to some of that. But if you want to just dig into that a bit, and for each of you, I mean, do you face your own sort of, or rather, what kinds of money issues do you face? What on your wish list doesn't get done because there's not willingness to fund it?
Well, I think it's important to understand that there are different kinds of programs that are available in prison that serve different needs. In a general sense, I cannot think of anything more important, generally speaking, than simple education. If you can't read or write, you need to learn to read and write. If you have a GED or a high school diploma, you need to try to get a post-secondary education. You need to do that, not because it is going to make you more employable, not because it's going to make you more money, because it changes you as a person. The process of sitting in a classroom with other people and listening to someone who is trying to help you move ahead in life because they recognize the situation that you are in, that can fundamentally change you. Now, obviously in prison, there are people in that classroom who are looking to do nothing more than to create problems and to make sure that no one else succeeds. But that's the sort of situation you have out here too. Racial prejudice is the same thing out here. You have people who don't want you to succeed, and if they can, they are going to throw marbles on the floor to you. So you're always talking about negotiating a solution, finding a way to move through the cracks in the organization, the difficulties that you face. So now, on the other hand, if you're talking about sheer employment, then obviously there are vocational programs in the Department of Corrections, any Department of Corrections, and some of them are more successful than others in terms of being able to make you really employable. But I do not know that there is a single answer.
Would you give some examples, some detail of what those programs are presently?
Yes, we know of people who have passed the electrical program in the Department of Corrections and who subsequently have come out and been employed and are now part of a union. Is there a large number of those people? We don't know, because we don't have those kinds of metrics. We do know that that is something. We also know that plumbing works well. The difficulty I have with this is that we always tend to think of these as menial labor. And, you know, there are a lot of people who go to prison, thousands and thousands and thousands of people who go to prison. And when they come out, they don't really want to do menial labor. What they want to do is a job just like anyone else, so that they can support their family and have the respect of their children and be able to afford what they need in order to make it in the world. I don't know that there is a lot of programming in prison that really addresses that sort of issue, because we have a very narrow focus. We've got blinders on about what we've done in the past.
Khalil?
So first off, there's a lack of technology-based programs. You know, we're moving forward. And I used to have this joke I used to tell when I was incarcerated to individuals: if the world blew up today, we wouldn't find out till tomorrow. And the reason being is because, what are you prepping people for? If an individual has done 10 years and you know everything is moving online, technology is driving society. However, we're not helping the individuals, we're not training them. And my firsthand experience, a lot of these programs are work-based. You know, it's labor for the Department of Corrections. And if we sit up here and we say, hey, that there is not an incentive for corrections to utilize this labor, or there's not a for-profit factor for some individuals who deal with corrections, because your for-profit prisons are not the only ones making money. You have privatized services in the state prisons.
So talk about that. So what are these labor programs? Specify what are they?
So okay, so now we can go straight to this year. Governor comes out, and by all means, it's not me attacking anybody. I'm looking at the realities of it. The governor comes out this year, and there's this big press conference of hiring about 700 more inmate firefighters. And I'm sitting here like, wow, but it was also predicted that this was going to be one of the worst fire seasons on record. Now, a lot of those individuals were going out. They were trained to be firefighters, and they get out, and it wasn't until I think a couple years ago that they would hire on a small amount of them once they were released. After they received all the training, after they put their life on the line, and now I'm saying, okay, if these individuals are putting their life on the line, fighting fires, saving people's property, saving our forests, then the state should honor that by allowing them to expunge their records. You know, they seem not to be a public threat when they have chainsaws and help and rakes and hoes and shovels out in the forest saving, you know, or helping to prevent firefighters. But then when it comes to expunging people's records and giving them a real second chance, then they are a threat to public safety now. So that's where I say the intentions of these programs and how they play out moving forward. Those 700 individuals were not hired on because they were great. No, it's an incentive for the state to get them out there to help with this fire season. but I want to see what they're going to do moving forward. And then you have,
sorry. So
Okay,
we
go ahead,
have
I'm sorry.
3 minutes and 22 seconds. And I'm on Khalil, you'll pardon me. Legislatively, there was a question here about reform. Legislatively, are there things going on where y'all are? Who are, in terms of reform, who are you collaborating with? What should people be keeping an eye out for?
Well, I am.
let me jump right.
Go ahead.
We'll let Khalil jump because I interrupted him. Jump back in.
Sure, go
Yeah,
ahead.
I just want to, I want to jump in on that because right now we're the biggest thing is earned release credits. Everybody is in agreement or that there should be some type of earned release credits. Who gets them is where everything goes haywire. But the one thing, nonviolent, non-dangerous offenses, and doing away with the mandatory 85% that was established back in 1993, implemented in 94, where we're at today and what's being done, it's kind of like a joke, because when we talk about nonviolent, non-dangerous offenses, and then you have individuals saying, hey, we represent victims or victims' rights, I totally understand. This is a victims' rights state, and people, in society, people should not be victimized. But when we're talking about nonviolent, non-dangerous offenses, what's usually associated with those as victims are property crimes, vehicle theft, or those type of things. We want the individual in the community to help them get employed, to start paying the victim or making the victim whole. But when earned release credit is held up and there's this narrative that we want to protect victims, we're talking about nonviolent, non-dangerous offenses where they're already being released under other laws or other bills. That's not going to jeopardize public safety. So I think the public safety narrative shifts depending on who wants to support individuals getting a significant amount of time off their sentence and who doesn't.
We got 1 minute and 15 seconds.
Do we have just a little bit? I'd like to return to the previous discussion just for a very quick thing, and that is that many people who come out of prison are going to have to start their own business. They simply are not going to be employable. They can't really manage what is going on. They're going to have to, in order to get housing and jobs and everything, they're going to have to really do something on their own. One of the programs that we don't have in prison is to help people become entrepreneurs. There are many, many very creative, very intelligent people in prison who nonetheless have serious crimes and who are going to need to start their own business. The more that we have that, the better off we are, because those people can avoid most of the collateral consequences that are huge, huge problems for people coming out of prison.
Okay, so 1 minute each, whip around, wrap around, and y'all have already given us fodder for stories, but what should journalists be covering on this front? Emily first, and then Khalil and James, you'll close us out.
I think it's important that you cover the narratives of the stories of the men and women before, during, and after. We always hear the crime and the punishment. We never hear what they were exposed to growing up. And in order to educate our communities, they need to know that not everybody lives in a utopia with every access available for resource. So it's very important to get to know our community members.
Khalil?
Well said, Emily. So you can, I think they need to cover the work that I'm doing at the ACLU, smartjusticeaz.org. Get in contact with us because we're serious about reducing our prison population. I say safely reducing our prison population by 50%, and then also combating racism within that system. So, cover that, and then you have to build all of this on truth. And like Emily said, stop looking at the small number of individuals who are getting out that may not succeed, who may commit other crimes, versus the large number of individuals who are successfully completing their obligations to the state. However, they're not allowed to move forward based on barriers or laws that create barriers for them to be stable in society. So thank you. smartjusticeaz.org.
James?
I think you have to go in completely different directions. I think that journalists need to cover the problems that are endemic to the Department of Corrections. Healthcare is absolutely horrible. There are many, many difficulties in the Department of Corrections that are increasing now. They're going into closed yards. That means that people are going to be locked down for 24 hours a day. There's going to be limited access to everything, and that's going to increase stress. We're also in Arizona where the temperatures are going to rise and the tensions are going to rise. On the other hand, you need to have stories about people who succeed. You need to have stories about people who are successfully managing introductions, and you need to cover the legislature because, quite frankly, those people control a lot of stuff and they don't really get it. So when you write your story, you need to write your story for your audience. And right now, people need to write more stories so that the educators can understand them, even if that means you have to write at a 6th grade level.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you. That was excellent.